So, hello everybody, and welcome to the Buddhist Recovery Network Academy. I'm Susanna, joining you from Helsinki, Finland, and I will be your host today. I'm a big fan of Buddhism, recovery, and Buddhist recovery. I facilitate both 8-step recovery meetings and mindfulness-based addiction recovery courses here in Finland, and I'm a member of the board of the Buddhist Recovery Network. And I'm going to say already in the beginning that we have an amazing summit coming up, Buddhist Recovery Network Summit. It's going to be in Fairview, New Jersey. It's going to be 10th through 13th of October. You can also come on the 11th. So if you're interested in spending the weekend with people who are in recovery, hearing some talks and having workshops and yoga, and yeah, we have this discount code for the Academy, the ones who come to visit Academy. It's minus 30%. So please come and join us. And today we have a new Academy teaching offered by Christie Bates. And the topic of the teaching is purification or harmony. And thanks for everybody for being part of our community today. I will tell a little bit about Reverend Christie and the talk in just a moment. All of our teachings are given freely, and we are blessed with some amazing teachers who have experience on the cushion, experience working with body, speech, and mind, experience in the ongoing practice of recovery by the way of Dharma. As we practice the Buddha's teaching of generosity, we invite you to give dana that will be given to support our ongoing Buddhist Recovery Network meetings and to support the teacher. You can give on a one-time or recurring basis using the link posted to the chat field by Vince, who is our tech, by the way, a very important person, the tech person. So please be sure to indicate that your donation is for the Academy, and we sincerely thank you already in advance for your generosity. And if you, in some case, if you just in case, if you forget to mention that it's for the Academy, we direct all the donations that come before, during, and right after this for the Academy. So no worries. And then we go to the yeah, actually I'm gonna answer Martin. No, it's only in person, the summit, so it's not hybrid, it's in person. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our guest teacher. So Reverend Christie Bates is a writer, retreat facilitator, licensed professional counselor, and a Dharmacharya of the Embracing Simplicity Contemplative Order, ordained by Venerable Banavati and the late Venerable Banadipa, who named her Pasatininya. Since 2009, she facilitated groups and embedded contemplative programming in residential treatment centers addressing various forms of trauma and addiction, including codependency and family recovery, which can overlap but are not synonyms. She was a founding member of Buddhist recovery communities in Nashville, Tennessee, US, and the surrounding area. A great deal of her work is centered around brain spotting, a finely tuned mindfulness practice that sounds interesting. In recent years, she relocated to Oxford, MS, US, in support of her family for a time and founded Deep South Dharma. Christie has developed the Beautiful Human app, which offers education, support, and training in developing the 10 parami for Buddhist recovery from disordered eating, chronic dieting, and body image obsession around size, ability, aging, and/or appearance. The app is centered around her ebook / audio course, The Beautiful Human, Contemplative Wisdom for Moving Beyond Diet Culture to Create a Life of Real and Lasting Beauty. She's also the author of an earlier work in her other language of contemplative Christianity called Accepting Your Resurrection, Reclaiming the Word That Restores Eternal Life, and the teaching. this is what Christie says about the teaching: purification or harmony. We typically encounter the teachings through the lens of a guilty self. Meanwhile, our English translations tend to skew in that direction too. And we know that the suffering of greed, hatred, and delusion firsthand. And we know that the suffering of greed, hatred, and delusion firsthand. What might it be like to encounter the Dhamma with an intent to harmonize and transmute these energies? Come to join Christie Pasadena as we explore together. So welcome, Reverend Christie. It's a pleasure to get to know you and hear your teaching.
Thank you so much, Susanna, and thanks so much. Can you hear me all right? Is the volume okay? Let's see. Good. So thank you for joining me. I'm so happy to see familiar faces and new faces. And I might actually bring my my talk up in front of my face, because I know I have to be spotlit for the recording, but I don't really want to be looking at myself the whole time, just because it'll be distracting. So that means I won't see the chat. I'll let Susanna and Vince take care of that. Thanks to Vince for being here. Thanks to do the tech for us. Thanks so much for the honor of inviting me here. Let's take a few moments. I'll say just a tad more to introduce myself, and specifically how I use my ordained name, because it actually goes very quickly into our topic. And so I'll save that explanation for after we settle in with about 10 minutes of meditation. So I want to invite you into that. Let's see, I'll give us momentarily some original sound for musicians so that we can hear the bell, and get my timer going so I don't get carried away. And we will start and end with the bell. Taking a moment just to allow yourself to follow the sound of the bell as long as you can hear it. And with the fading of that sound, take a moment to notice the sounds that are available to you in your own environment. Maybe sounds of appliances running in the background, fans or air conditioning, maybe traffic, maybe voices from other rooms, other apartments nearby. And then gently bringing your attention inward to the internal sounds of your own body. Maybe starting with the experience of my voice in your ear, which, of course, the waves start from outside, but the sound actually happens inside of you, where those waves meet your eardrums. Perhaps you can find digestive sounds internally, or the sound of your own heartbeat. There's the illusion of sound that many people get from their auditory thinking. And that can also just be treated as something we're overhearing from another room. It's not a threat. And maybe for some, there's this sort of high-pitched inner ear sound. sometimes called the sound of silence. If you find that sounds from outside are especially irritating, there's something really empowering about using this sound of silence as the resting place for your attention. And then other sounds just sort of become variations on a theme, because you're already attending to sound. There's not this feeling that something has caught you off guard. And some of us are wired in that very sensitive way. And you can absolutely just stay with that experience if you like. And then for some of us, the experience of hearing sound or resting with sound feels a little too close to the stream of thought. And something that can be really useful is to swallow and just follow the swallow down into the body, finding a resting place where you can just rise and fall with the experience of breath. Sounds and other sensory experience will still monitor your environment in the background as a means of providing or offering safety. But we want to give at least 51% of our attention to the experience of breath, if that's what we're choosing to work with. And of course, there is such a diversity in the way that people are wired. And so if you're one of those folks whose mind runs on a number of tracks, it can be kind of fun to play with rising and falling with the breath while monitoring sound, sort of keeping the mind so full of the present moment that you get that relaxed feeling of being right here, right now. And you can just experiment with that. This is all to be enjoyed. And just for your internal timekeeper that has questions, we'll enjoy that for about 3.5 more minutes. As we get into this final minute and come back into a little more interaction with each other, even though we won't all be talking at first, being aware of the different aspects of mind going on for you, your appreciation for the wisdom that brought you here, that just brought you to sit and meditate with other people for a few minutes, to pay attention to some of the most important things in your life. Maybe little worried parts of you that have trouble settling, or regretful parts, or even really scary parts of you that can be hard to sit with. We're going to meet all of these in our story today. And so making a point to know that all that is in you is welcome in this practice. No part of the heart or mind is a problem. It may be carrying a problem, but it is not the problem. So again, thank you for being here and for your practice. Let me get this, and I'm going to restart my timer. Look, I had to really time this carefully. When in my online group that I do on Monday nights, I'll usually have a few things jotted down, maybe a quote or something, but I'll have a few points, and then I'm speaking pretty freely. And there's so much that I want to share with you that I wanted to time it to give us plenty of time for discussion. So excuse the reading if that bothers you. But I'll keep your pictures in front of me so that I'm aware I'm talking to live people as I share this. So again, thanks so much. I will mention, and Susanna mentioned this also, that I've been involved in family member recovery since 1985, also recovery from codependency. These are not synonymous. They are not the same thing. They certainly can overlap. Right. But folks recovering from the effects of caregiving or living with other people's addictions and mental illnesses have some of the same struggles and symptoms that any other caregiver might, any other family member of somebody who's got a chronic issue. Codependency is sort of a collection of traits that develop in those of us who have grown up in chronically stressed situations. So obviously there can be some overlap. A person can have had both of those experiences, but those aren't exactly the same thing. And I think that can be really helpful to acknowledge. Also, this recovery from disordered eating, I have found that I've gotten a lot of traction in my disordered eating recovery from focusing on the 10 parami. And Kamala Masters, over 10 years ago, did a series on the 10 perfections, and she called it the qualities of a beautiful human. And so I have picked that up ever since that time because I think it works so much better than the word perfections to get at what the Buddha's description of a beautiful person really is. So again, to begin to introduce our topic, I'm going to tell you that when our cohort of Dharmacharyas was ordained by Venerable Panyawati and Venerable Panyadipa, we were given the opportunity to choose whether we wanted the term acharya or reverend on our certificates. We're here in the U.S., Embracing Simplicity Disorders, based at Heartwood Refuge in North Carolina. And so we had the option of what to put on these certificates, on the laminated clergy calling cards that we use when we visit hospitals or when we sign marriage licenses. And at that time, which was 2016, I chose not to use reverend, even though I will have to say, I have always felt that my role as a group leader, meditation leader, felt more like a pastor or minister than a teacher. I certainly do some teaching, and I love all the nerdy scholarship stuff, but I'm not a scholar. And I think of our monastics as Dhamma teachers because they have to really be scholars in the suttas, in the Pali language, or Sanskrit, if that's their tradition. So at the time, I chose not to use reverend, though, because I felt that living here in the South, I was afraid that that would be misleading somehow. I thought that people here would assume I would just, as a Christian pastor, and so that it was sort of my job to prevent that from happening. And then in 2021 or so, I took part in a 3-day training, just a beginning of a deep dive into intersectionality and social justice. And even as we did our pre-exercises, getting ready for that training, I realized that what I was doing was marginalizing myself, marginalizing people that might need my services in this part of the world, and in fact, marginalizing the Dhamma just to keep mainstream people comfortable in their assumptions. And so through that training and in the follow-up training over the next few years, my peers regularly called me Reverend Christie until I got comfortable using the English word Reverend for what I am. Because that allows other folks that are on the edges of Southern culture outside of the mainstream religion to know that I'm available to them in this way. So here's how this relates to our topic right now. That experience of internalizing oppression was transformed not by cutting out the part of me that cared about other people's feelings, but by expanding it to include not just the majority of people, but all of us. And it was transformed by the love of a larger community that encompassed larger truths, reminded me that it's not my job to avoid offending, it's my job to be of service. And so that was, that became, everything from how I talk about myself on my website, when I'm in situations of trading business cards with other therapists, that's my day job. Letting people know that I have this Buddhist background, and also a contemplative Christian background, but that the title I use is Reverend, to let people know I'm available to them in that way. So Buddhism traditionally uses the word purification to speak of the process of freeing ourselves from greed and hatred and delusion. But due to misunderstandings, there's just a flavor around the word purification. I want to suggest that this transformation that comes from sort of being introduced to larger truths by meeting a larger compassion, this transformation might be better described as a process of harmonizing our various concerns that we have for ourselves and other people, harmonizing relationships between various aspects of our own minds and hearts, and harmonizing our relationships to the outside world. I found a wonderful example of this, and there are numbers of them, but a favorite of mine is in the sutta regarding Venerable Angulimala. Angulimala, some of you may know, was a famous serial killer in the time of the Buddha. And Angulimala, literally translated, is finger necklace. He was known to make a necklace out of the fingers of people that he murdered. Now, I should mention that you're going to hear that the story tells us Angulimala killed 30, 40 men at a time, leveled entire villages, etc. This is what lets me know that even though a serial killer would have certainly existed at this time, that what this sutta is really telling us about is an aspect of our own minds. So I really find that I definitely benefit from the suttas taken at face value, but there are certain suttas that I benefit even more when I approach them as a piece of Jungian dream work. And the very simplified, I'm sure there are people on this call that have a much more refined explanation of what Jungian dream work is. But just a quick intro is that Carl Jung taught a way of doing dream work in which every character in your dream, every location mentioned, every action of the story is an aspect of oneself. And I find that in the scriptures of various religions, the ones that have survived, that have these sort of fantastical aspects to them, that they can be encountered as a dream about our own psyche that we can work with. And even just this reminds me that the Buddha taught that the self is not what we think it is. He told us, it's not form, it's not the body, it's not feeling, it's not cognitions, etc. I should also mention, just because so many people interested in Buddhism and Buddhist recovery have a sort of a clinical bent, I should mention that in the world of therapy, this sort of waking dream work also occurs in what is these days called internal family systems. Although if you've worked in addiction treatment for many years, people have been doing inner child work forever. For decades, not forever, but for decades. And internal family systems is this really complete, all-encompassing way of looking at that kind of work. So if you're involved in that from any angle, a lot of this story will really stand out to you, the story. Now, this is not a talk where I'm going to go line by line through the sutta. First of all, it's too long, but I just want to highlight certain pieces of the story, although there will be places where I love the language so much that I will share it with you. The Buddha teaches in this sutta, the Angulimala Sutta, and elsewhere, that truths are healing, right? Truths with a plural. It's not just that there's one truth. Truths, he gives us 4 noble truths, for example. And we'll see how truths heal through harmonizing our relationship to reality. When the Buddha used the Pali word sama, like sama sambuddha, we translate that word as right or wise, like right view, wise view. That's the Pali word sama. And it has reference to musical harmony. So sama is genuine, complete, and another definition of it is in perfect harmony. So right from the beginning of the Angulimala Sutta, and I'll just mention here, you don't have to do it right now, but just if you don't already know, if you want to see that sutta, you can Google MN Sutta 86. You can look up any sutta online by those MN Sutta 86 or whichever one of the Nikayas. So the Angulimala Sutta comes from the Majjhima Nikaya. It's Sutta 86. I'm using the Access to Insight translation. So you'll get several translations and you can compare and use them. And I really love that. So at first, let's just look at the first 3 verses of this sutta. It says, I have heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in Yeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park monastery. So this is a monastery that a rich man named Anathapindika built and devoted to the Buddha to allow him and his Sangha to stay. And at that time in King Pasenadi's realm, there was a bandit named Angulimala, brutal, bloody-handed, devoted to killing and slaying, showing no mercy to living beings. He turned villages into non-villages, towns into non-towns, settled countryside into unsettled countryside. Having repeatedly killed human beings, he wore a garland made of fingers. Then the Blessed One, the Buddha, early in the morning, having put on his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, went into Savatthi for alms. Having wandered for alms in Savatthi and returning from his alms round, after his meal, he set his lodging in order. Then, carrying his robes and bowl, he went along the road to where Angulimala was staying. Cowherds, shepherds, and farmers saw him going along the road to where Angulimala was staying. And on seeing him said, "Don't go along that road, contemplative, for on that road is Angulimala, brutal, bloody-handed, etc., etc." Groups of 10, 20, 30, and 40 men have gone along that road, and even they have fallen into Angulimala's hands. When this was said, the Blessed One kept going in silence. A second time and a third time, the cowherds, shepherds, and farmers said to the Blessed One, "Don't go along that road." But when this was said, the Blessed One kept going in silence. So right away, we see that the Buddha apparently had a plan that day. He went intentionally and decidedly to where there was what we would say is a really urgent need for healing and teaching, right? To go intervene on this person that's killing people by the score. And he does his morning practices. He begins his day adjusting his robes correctly to indicate a mindful, heedful awareness, a lack of hurry. He went to the village nearby, not just to nourish his body, but to function as a recipient of the donations of the people there. He knew that every morning people in the village were looking not only to donate food, but to be able to ask their questions, to maybe receive a Dharma talk from him. And so he had this really important day-to-day relationship to the people nearby. So he took care of that first. And this is the first important recovery principle that I see in this story, that when a decision or intention arises from our wisdom, what in the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism is called Buddha nature, it's too important to skimp on our spiritual hygiene, no matter how urgent the problem seems. Usually, and there are exceptions, like if your house is on fire, but usually if an action feels so urgent that we can't prepare ourselves first, that we can't take care of grooming, eating, can't attend to the people we're responsible to around us, then it's likely not coming from a wise and awakened place. So moving on to the second principle, which is that as we start moving in the direction of healing, as that wisdom in us starts going toward what needs healing, we're going to run into what here is referred to as cowherds, shepherds, and farmers. All these little fears, the fearful aspects of our own psyche, who seek to protect us from the heavy, dark energy that we seek to heal. So the wise awakened mind carries sort of this tone and attitude that it can handle the fear and anger, and it doesn't stop to explain itself. This is really good information. The Buddha's way of handling this is good information for those of us who are hit with repetitive fears, constant repeating fears, that the Buddha knew better than to try to engage or argue with those fears, because that just gives them a lot more energy. He just kept going toward what his intention was for the day. So for a third recovery principle, let's hear what happens when this Buddha, with its healing, compassionate attention, gets closer to this highly destructive energy. So from the sutta, it says, "Then Angulimala saw the Blessed One coming from afar, and on seeing him, this thought occurred to him. Isn't it amazing? Groups of 10, 20, 30, and 40 men have gone along this road, and even they have fallen into my hands. And yet now this contemplative comes attacking, as it were, alone and without a companion. Why don't I kill him? How interesting that Angulimala sees the Buddha as coming to attack." The most, unthreatening, he's got his robe and a bowl for receiving food. Like, how in the world could that be threatening? But he's ready to kill him. So Angulimala, taking up his sword and shield, buckling on his bow and quiver, followed right behind the Blessed One. So Angulimala does not recognize the Buddha as his own self-awakened mind or self-awakening mind. this is to me, this is a great portrait of the eve of recovery. In any new area, we can be in recovery for a long time, but when we are getting recovery in a new area of life, we can see this happening. Things are starting to stir. A change comes our way that begins to make us question our coping skills, the things we felt at home with before. But at first, we see it as a threat. We don't recognize that what's happening is we're about to be rescued. So then there's the more famous part of the story that some people may be familiar with. Angulimala, who suits up with his shield and weapons, starts following after the Buddha, and even though he's running and the Buddha is walking, he can't catch him. And finally, he yells, stop. And the Buddha just keeps walking at a leisurely pace and says, I've stopped, you stop. And Angulimala is so taken aback by this and so surprised by the answers that he gets curious and begins to dialogue directly with the Buddha. So this gives us the fourth Buddhist recovery principle that I want to point out, that this heart-to-heart encounter that develops between destructive parts of ourselves, both ourselves internally and our other people in the world, that dialogue between a compassionate, awakened mind and this internal destructive greed, hatred, delusion mind begins with the movement of the awakened mind toward what is scary. It begins there, and that dialogue really takes a turn when genuine curiosity arises. And without going into the whole list of the 7 enlightening factors, I will just point out that the first enlightening factor is mindful awareness. The second is investigation or curiosity. So this is where it begins. Now, as we might expect from a sutta that is about someone questioning the Buddha, this dialogue leads to Angulimala becoming devoted to the Buddha and letting go of the burden of harmful coping skills. I'll read the last part of this because it's so beautiful, and I think some of us may have experienced a moment like this. It's also interesting how he frames it. So Angulimala says, "At long last, a greatly revered great seer for my sake has come to the great forest. Having heard your verse in line with the Dhamma, I will go about having abandoned evil." So saying, the bandit hurled his sword and weapons over a cliff into a chasm, a pit. Then the bandit paid homage to the feet of the one well gone. That's a term for the Buddha. And right there requested the going forth, meaning he requested to become a monk under the Buddha's training. The awakened one, the compassionate great seer, the teacher of the worlds along with its devas, said to him then, "Come, bhikkhu," bhikkhu meaning monk, because that request in itself was bhikkhuhood for him, was monkhood for him, just for somebody to ask him, "May I become a monk under your training?" That was becoming a monk in the day. So I always imagine as this story was passed along through the oral tradition, some of the older monks saying, that's how we became monks in the old day. We just had to ask the Buddha. We didn't have all these, hoops we have to jump through now. But when you're directly in the presence of that awakened mind, things get really simple. So now this former bandit has become not just a bhikkhu, not just a monk called Venerable Angulimala. He's also the Buddha's attendant on the way back home. That's a truly venerable, truly venerated position. He accompanies the Buddha home, wandering by stages, it says. So this whole first act of Angulimala's play has given us a beautiful beginning to his story, even though this is often all that we hear. So we can get, if we don't read the sutta for ourselves, we can get the impression that he became a monk and lived happily ever after, sort of thing, just because that's how, at least in the US, we tend to like our stories to be. But there are a couple of other acts in this little play that I want to highlight for us because they have some really rich recovery principles. And we have a few more minutes for those. So in Act 2, we actually meet King Pasenada. So remember, the sutta began with that saying all of this is happening in Pasanada's realm. So that tells me that Pasanada is the public face of our human experience, right? He's the rule follower. He's the one that makes sure other people follow the rules, and that sort of thing. He comes to the monastery at first with a cavalry of roughly 500 horsemen. Now, in the suttas, anytime you run into about 500, that's a figure of speech. That's like today we would say about 1,000,000. I've got 1,000,000 things to do today. So it's a figure of speech saying he had a lot of cavalry with him. But when he goes, by the time he gets all the way into the Buddha's room, he's alone. He had to drop his coping mechanisms as well to meet with the Buddha one-on-one. And he expresses his concern because he's heard, the word has traveled along the road all the way to the palace that the Buddha has taken in this serial killer into the Sangha. And so the Buddha invites Pasanada to investigate for himself the change in Angulimala, right? So some of our public-facing, rule-following parts can be a bit legalistic if not harmonized with wisdom. You know, it's what we call white-knuckling our way through the world, really. It's like when we try to manage what feels out of control by being over-controlled rather than allowing wisdom to allow us a direct experience. And when the Buddha, the awakened mind, allows the king to see the change in Angulimala for himself, not only does the king relax, but now he includes the venerable among those monks that he supports with robes, food, medicine, and lodging. He's very inspired by the change that he sees and wants to support that. So again, the issue is harmony in relationship. This conscientious part, represented by the king, didn't cease to exist. We don't want to quit being conscientious, but we want to be conscientious less fearfully, right? And it can release fear. This part of us can release fear when we expose ourselves to the enlightened mind. So that's the second act. That's the recovery principle from the second act I wanted to share. And then the third, in the act 3 of this sutta, or what I'm calling act 3, Venerable Angulimala awakens early in the morning. Now, we just pause for a moment to say, we're not to assume that means like the next day. Dream time can be any time. Often these suttas will say, so-and-so did something awakening early in the morning, or in a realm. It's sort of like today we would recognize it maybe as once upon a time, right? Once upon a time, Angulimala arose early in the morning. He arranged his robes, went out for alms, just like the Buddha did in Act 1. And after the alms round, after the meal, he goes to visit the Buddha. And he's in some real distress. He tells the Buddha about seeing a woman suffering a breech birth. That's feet first, and extremely painful, and dangerous also. And shares how the thought arose repeatedly, how tormented are living beings. So clearly, I mean, Angulimala is just taken over with this sorrow and compassion for human suffering. And clearly, he is showing up now as a different person than the one who ran around killing people before. So the Buddha, recognizing he is talking to a very different person, says, he suggests that Venerable Angulimala go to the woman and say this verse, which has become a famous Parita chant in the Theravada tradition, or this is just a few lines of it. It says, "Sister, since I was born, I do not recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you, well-being for your fetus." Now, to make some sense of this, it may help to know that in the Pali tradition of Buddhism, there is an understanding that an utterance of truth brings healing, is protective. So like the chant, some of you may have heard the chant that includes lines like, "By the utterance of this truth, may I grow in the master's way, by my devotion to the Buddha and the blessing of this practice, by its power, may all obstacles be overcome." Well, by what power? Not the Buddha, by the power of uttering the truth, by the power of my devotion to the Buddha, right? So this is where, in another tradition, it said, your faith has made you well. I haven't made you well. Your faith has made you well, right? So this is what this is telling us. And of course, people in recovery do know something about the healing power of truth, right? Getting honest with ourselves about what we've done or haven't done, what we do or don't control. But notice how Angulimala's new identity is a given for the Buddha, right? Because the Buddha is living in this state of like full enlightenment, and he sees Angulimala as this completely different being than the one he rescued. But it's not that way yet for Angulimala. And he says, but Lord, wouldn't that be a lie for me? For I have intentionally killed many living beings. And so the Buddha is sort of reminded, oh, right, I've got to meet this guy where he is, right? He still sees himself as this person that did this killing. And, for the Buddha, it's as if Angulimala did all of this horrible stuff when he was sleepwalking. And then once he woke up, the Buddha doesn't hold it against him, right? The stuff he did when he was sleepwalking. But what actually Angulimala gives us this next recovery principle, that it may not be our fault what we do when we're sleepwalking, but after we wake up, it's still our responsibility to clean up the mess. Right? It's not nobody else's job to do that, right? So we don't have to hate ourselves about anything we did when we were asleep or sleepwalking. But once we've awoken to some truth and we see we've created some mess, we clean it up, but there doesn't have to be a lot of self-blame about it. So the Buddha, meeting Angulimala where he is, says, because he says, wouldn't that be a lie for me? He says, look, then in that case, Angulimala, go to the woman and on arrival say to her, sister, since I was born in the noble birth, I do not recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you. And so this Angulimala is given the message in a way that he can believe in it. Like, since I became a monk, since I was reborn as a monk, I haven't intentionally killed any living being. He feels he can stand behind that statement because he still is seeing himself as sort of a permanent thing. And but he's making a claim that he can believe in, and according to the tradition, it did heal, and she had a safe birth, and her baby was fine. So this kind of wisdom that even if something's not someone's fault, it is our responsibility. This wisdom can sometimes be missing, I find, if someone's idea of Buddhist recovery is incomplete, right? If their hope is to recover through sort of a bypass of that sort of like, oh, in the absolute truth, this or that is true for me. And it's like, yeah, but we have to know with what you really experience as true for you, right? And what people that you are related to experience of you. So Buddhist recovery is not less stringent than other types of recovery. And so this, we have to really recognize that there's no spiritual bypass around responsibilities. And we'll see that even further in a little bit. So here, Angulimala gets relief from seeing this woman share healing. Also, he apparently learned something from the Buddha, how the Buddha sees him, because after this event, he becomes fully enlightened. He becomes an arahant. And but even after that, he has to deal with people throwing shoes and rocks at his head. And the Buddha says, it's just leftover karma. Be glad you're getting to burn it off in this lifetime. You're getting off the wheel. You're going to be spared a lot of suffering. So to give us a few minutes, I want to just close with a few lines that Venerable A closes with. And then we'll take just a minute or half a minute to just sort of gather our thoughts and then have some discussion. Angulimala, in closing, here are just a few of his lines. Who once was heedless, but later is not, brightens the world like the moon set free from a cloud. May even my enemies hear talk of Dhamma. May even my enemies devote themselves to the Buddha's bidding. Some tame with a blunt stick, with hooks and with whips, but without blunt or bladed weapon, I was tamed by such a one who has no rod or weapon. Doer of no harm is my name, but I used to be a doer of harm. Today, I am true to my name, for I harm no one at all. And so we will pause there and feel free to, let's see, what is a term? We already have a question, so I'm gonna jump right in because of our time. What is a term for that? If you don't have time to prepare for something, then it is probably not coming from a wise place. Oh, that's interesting. It might be urgent, more urgent than it is important, maybe. That's really what comes to me. Now, sometimes things are both urgent and important, right? Sometimes we have to get out of the house if there's a fire, but often that sort of urgent energy, often if we have an urgent energy that wants to jump out ahead of our spiritual practices, it's almost like there's this part of us that sort of is going rogue and wants to do what it wants to do, without our really consulting our own wisdom first. Let's see. Yeah, and spiritual hierarchy. Yeah.
I added that there, and I have to say thanks for your teaching. I was very moved by it, and especially at the end when you were talking about this responsibility. What came to my mind was that this kind of like compassion and hopefulness that people who come to recovery might have this sense of being horrible people, like the man with the fingers, but still it's possible, and what matters is from what you do from that on. That was very beautiful. And we do have to start wrapping up soon, but if there is an urgent like burning desire for somebody to ask a question, I give a couple of minutes and then we have to move towards the ending. I would like to say a few words about Dana. There will be links posted to the chat field soon, so don't worry. You will get all the information, and we will keep the room open for a few minutes after the top of the hour, so you can copy your links. So your generosity can help to strengthen the recovery community and grow the academy, and can be a practical expression of gratitude and metta. That is, it's Buddhist practice. So we invite you to practice generosity and give Dana in support of these teachings to be shared with our teacher and with the Buddhist Recovery Network. And there will be a link in the chat that will direct you to the BRN website, and please indicate that your gift is for the Academy. And then we have a super event coming up in October 10th through 13th. I'm going to travel there from Finland. If you're closer to New Jersey, you should come as well, because we have the Buddhist Recovery Network Summit. There are some amazing teachers like Kevin Griffin, Vince Cullen, and Bimala Sara, Valerie Mason, John in there. So it's an in-person event, and it's a beautiful place with the lake. So bring your swimming suits as well. So and Vince will be posting the link there as well about it. And then we have a podcast that has again started, and that link will be in the chat field as well. We will have, we are in YouTube as well. And then we have a Facebook group, and please answer the questions so that we can accept you in. There were 5 or 6 people today that didn't answer the questions, and we cannot approve you. I'm sorry, but it's for the safety of the group. And there is also weekly Buddhist recovery meeting. The type of the meeting changes weekly. You can check the schedule on the webpage using the link that is in the chat as well. And if I forgot something, Vince is posting links, and Reverend Christie maybe as well if there is something missing. But we will keep the room open for a few minutes so you can copy the links. And thanks again for Christie. And as we do in Buddhism, there is the transference of merits. to the end. So, because we are not doing this for ourselves, but for all the living creatures in the world. So thank you for joining us today. May the merit we have gained go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be safe. So go safely. See you next month again. Bye-bye.